Artificial Intelligence, Law and Justice, Session 22, Responsible AI. We will begin with a recap of what we have discussed. In the previous session, we extended our discussion on AI ethics in the specific context of law and justice. In particular, we had also mentioned about the elements of AI ethics in law and its importance for lawyers and its application in different branches of law, in the sense that we highlighted why AI ethics is important. We also looked at that how AI ethics guidelines are being issued by different institutions in the legal practice, particularly the American Bar Association, and also highlighted that some of them have been listed, and then many state bar associations and the other professional associations are also working on them. Finally, we repeatedly mentioned a few things. One, AI ethics is not substitute for professional ethics, it will only supplement it. And then adopting AI ethics cannot be an excuse for not adopting the professional ethics. Or professional ethics and AI ethics will always go hand in hand, rather than to thinking that adopting of one we will exonerate the person from adopting of the another. So having discussed AI ethics in two sessions, let us move to something that is equally important, particularly in the context of AI in law and justice, that is responsible AI. So the question that inevitably arises here is that these days there's lots and lots of talk about responsible AI. Why it has been so much of attention and concern? Because we do not talk of responsible car driving, we do not talk of responsible use of mobile phones or mobile technology, we do not talk of responsible nanotechnology, we do not talk of responsible biotechnology. Although theoretically, and then even people have written about the idea of responsible biotechnology, responsible nanotechnology and all, these are not something which people talk, or these are not something which institutions time and again talk about it. We are doing it, we are committed to it, we are very much into it. So why responsible AI has become such a matter of a lot of concern, attention and focus? In particular, responsibility in AI itself, we are not very sure as to who is responsible to whom. And then we have also seen in the previous sessions as to how difficult it is to fix responsibility in AI, particularly in some applications when pertaining to law. So what exactly is responsible AI then? Is responsible AI something that is very vague, very general, and then that can mean different things to different people? Or is it something that is a set of core values accepted by all, which means the same thing to everyone? This is a big question. In one sense, responsible AI may have some core values which many organizations, individuals, governments, and others agree. But then there is no common set of values which everyone agrees to, in the sense that you cannot say that responsible AI is something that everyone adheres to and then agrees to the same thing everywhere. It varies from different contexts, from different organization, from purpose to purpose, from the sector to sector. Again, do we really need something like responsible AI? Because in the last two sessions, we went in elaborately into the need for AI ethics and then why AI ethics has become an important topic in law and justice. So when we have AI ethics, do we need something extra called responsible AI to that? Can't we do well with AI ethics alone, and then why the hell we need one more thing here? Because in any case, AI ethics and responsible AI, whether they mean or anything or not, ethical issues, most of the issues and concerns are already addressed by AI ethics itself. And then what exactly we mean by responsible AI and what is not? In the sense that can we specifically say that this is where responsible AI stops and this is where responsible AI stops in all circumstances for all the technologies to come? We cannot. Having said that, we need to look into why this whole concern about responsible AI arises. As we saw in the question of AI ethics, concerns were there right from the days of Turing. Concerns were expressed by scientists like Joseph Weissenbaum, Norbert Wiener, and then the concerns were also expressed by many others. So we traced that history and then also went back and then said some of the questions relating to technology and ethics were raised in the days of Aristotle. Then we also talked about how in the last century and then in this century people have talked about it, including Heidegger. We also mentioned about Hans Jonas. So whole lot of philosophers, whole lot of ethicists, whole lot of even scientists have talked about it, ethics. So similarly, responsible AI, Turing test is again something that went into whether the system can mimic human or not. So that again the question of responsible in the sense that whether it imitates, whether it misleads or not. Then Asimov's rule of robots also brought in the question of ethical rules for robots. But in context of AI, nothing significantly happened in the during the AI vintage years of 1960s to 1990s in terms of responsible AI. Because in those years, AI development was in patches, in phases, but then it was not something that really attracted much attention. For the simple reason, AI was not that much commercialized. Too, AI had its own phases of waxing and waning. The sense that AI was in doldrums, AI will undergo winter. Then suddenly AI picked up in the last 30 years, and then since last 25 years, AI has been back into public attention, too many developments, and suddenly in the last 5 years, everyone is talking of AI. But during 2000 to 2010, AI took shape for better concerns. So since AI decisively took shape for better and started progressively becoming a technology that has got huge potential, the AI winter was over by then. Many companies, including Google, Microsoft, academics, they started thinking about good and responsible practices, partially to address concerns from the public and the institutions, including government, partially to tell that we are responsible business persons, we are responsible AI system developers, and we are responsible in the sense that we do concern. We are also concerned about what our systems will do, and then how to address some of these concerns. So, at the international level, the Organization for Economic Cooperation Development, or called OECD, came up with the guidelines in 2018. Organization for Economic Cooperation Development, or OECD, is a group of countries that are focused on many things, including education, including environment, emerging technologies, governance, tax reforms, and all. And OECD has been working tremendously impactful work on emerging technologies right from the day one. In fact, they are one of the few organizations, intergovernmental organizations, that have been consistently working on some of these issues for the past 30 to 40 years. So OECD came up with these guidelines in 2018, and that was taken as the golden standard, as the intergovernmental standard. From 2020 onwards, industry also accepted this, but although there was no broad consensus among the industry on what is responsible AI, they all came up with their own guidelines, understandings on responsible AI, developed their own methodology. Little later, the Global Partnership on AI called GPAI also adopted OECD's 2000 guidelines as the basic principle, and then that again became an internationally accepted norm by the governments. So OECD started this in one sense in 2018, but then others built upon it, others developed it into something that we call as responsible AI today. So responsible AI today is much more widely developed in terms of principles and guidelines, and then industries across sectors are used to responsible AI. For example, medicine, diagnostics, finance, education, or even using AI in drug discovery, drug development. Everywhere, responsible AI is the mantra. In some countries, responsible AI becomes part and parcel of the regulation. For example, the USA Act has borrowed a lot of things from the idea of responsible AI and has incorporated them. So these regulations make it necessary to inevitably to adhere to some norms of responsible AI. In fact, the EU Act goes much more than responsible AI because it does categorize the systems into different risk categories. It also looks into the responsible use of technology, and again, as an act that governs the use of AI, it has well incorporated the responsible AI principles into translating them into action. Then there have been development of standards, and then companies' statements on AI ethics necessitate further steps. So responsible AI also means that development of standards has to be done, and then development of standards is being done as and has been done. So all these things put together have created a demand for responsible AI from developers, adopters, and other stakeholders. So responsible AI today is much more than a mantra, is something that everyone is aware in terms of theory and practice. But how much of that really translate that into discernible practice or actionable outcome is different. Now the responsible AI, a huge overlap with AI ethics is there. So UA Act is something that is very significant. Then the Council of Europe's or the Europe is AI Treaty, which again has got important thing on responsible AI because its core is responsible AI in the context of human rights and then liberties. Then UNESCO's AI guidelines straight away lead to responsible AI. Then in the Indian context, Niti Aayog's paper on responsible AI tried to formulate an Indian perspective on responsible AI and then tried to bring out Indian perspective, identify certain norms that are which could be part of the Indian governance of AI using responsible AI principles. Then Google has its own principles, Microsoft framework is there, IBM has its own principles, then PricewaterhouseCoopers has got its own responsibility. Salesforce includes that part of the maturity model. Then Accenture has own practice on responsible AI. Then Cisco has got a framework. Intel has got something that is called as AI for social good. Then SAP, the software developer, also has got AI ethics. So responsible AI, which is either part of AI ethics or standalone one, is already there. So we talked about the global partnership of AI. Then IEEE's Golden Global Initiative on Ethics is also focused on ethics and responsible AI. Then other institutions like AI Now Institute, Montreal Declaration of Responsible Development of AI, European Commission's ethical guidelines, which again have been incorporated into the UEAI Act, are also there. So, on AI influenced development AI Act, which is a guidelines, high level expert group coming up with ethics guidelines, getting into AI Act, ensure that both responsible AI principles and ethical AI principles are become part of the governing governance of AI, at least in Europe. In 2017, there was a conference in Asimolar conference on AI. So there they came up with Asimolar AI principles, where these principles provide a broad vision for the ethical and beneficial development of artificial intelligence. This placed Asimolar has got a unique connotation when it comes to ethics of emerging technologies because in the similar conference of the early 1980s, when the genetic engineering was just taking shape, and then when genetic engineering was not fully commercialized, and then there are a lot of concerns about genetic engineering being used in the sense that things going wrong, a set of scientists and others convened a meeting in Asimolar and then they came up with some guidelines. In fact, they wanted the National Institute of Health and other US government agencies to develop guidelines so that genetic engineering can be handled safely without risk to society and the genetic engineering technology can be harnessed for good. So the Asimolar associations with emerging technologies, particularly biotechnology, now AI, is something that is recurring. So the similar AI principles are also very principles which are very similar to the ones put up by OECD, but then similar came little earlier. So there are some questions inevitably which would arise when we talk all this. Is responsible AI a generic concept that can be applied elsewhere, or do we need sector-specific responsible AI policies? One, responsible AI, what exactly it means when it comes to clinical trials, when it comes to developing drugs, when it comes to education, when it comes to lending, or when it comes to applying fintech in banking and finance, or when it comes to specifically talking of responsible AI in the context of convergence of technologies or in the context of missionary which is being deployed by defense forces. Then we have seen a whole lot of guidelines, ethics principles. Is there something that is common among these things, these bewildering variety of guidelines and practices, or are they talking of the same thing using different jargon and different words, or are they talking of different things in different words without any consensus or broader understanding as to what I mean by transparency by company X guideline is not the same as what is meant by transparency by company Y guidelines, but company X and company Y agree on something else when it comes to responsible AI? Or are we in such a situation? And what exactly is the theoretical understanding of responsible AI? Does it stand on a strong theoretical footing which is developed from philosophy, ethics, moral philosophy, political science, again philosophy of technology, and then whole lot of disciplines? Or is it a fashionable idea that is just floating around because some organizations started working on it earlier, OECD came up with something and then everyone is talking of? Or is it something that has got a very solid theoretical perspective from which you can develop a whole lot of things? Then the question is responsible AI part of the hard law, or is it part of the soft law, or is it part of the self-regulation that would be left to the AI companies or the users or the adopters or the deployers to decide? Or are we talking of hybrid approach where there will be some hard law component in terms of acts, regulations inscribed in through acts and then government principles, and then soft law, that is industry norms, voluntary guidelines, voluntary self-regulation. When they combine, they become hybrid approach. So what are we talking of responsible AI when it comes to governance? Then in the question of AI ethics, we also saw whether AI ethics should be culturally sensitive, should be culturally contextualized, or we talk of AI ethics in the broader context of transparency, fundamental rights, or universal rights. So, is the same thing applicable to responsible AI also, or is it a Western idea or ideal, or for that matter, some would say even Europe or European ideal that is imposed on the rest on account of some guidelines, and everyone thinks that responsible AI is important. So these are some of the questions which are raised in the literature, which are hotly debated, and of course they are also addressed. But this is not a course on responsible AI nor on ethics of AI. So we mention them in passing, but we also highlight that these questions cannot be wished away, particularly when we talk of responsible AI in the context of law and justice. One way to look into this is that instead of beating around the bush in terms of vague terms, this, that, and all, we can straight away go into the principles and practice built up by International Standards Organization, Build Responsible AI. So it gives a guideline how to manage AI ethics debate. Then fairness. The data sets used for training AI systems must be given careful consideration to avoid discrimination. So fairness here says first avoid discrimination, look at the data sets, scrutinize them carefully. Then transparency, it says, should be designed in a way that allow users to understand how algorithms work. So algorithmic transparency is important because algorithms are going to work, algorithms are going to decide. Then non-maleficence is very important because they should not intentionally or built with some malefied intention or with some criminal intention to cause harm, either to the environment or to society or to people. So non-maleficence is that by default or by their action, they should not do any harm. Or the first principle is do no harm. Then accountability comes, then privacy then comes, then robustness comes, then inclusiveness comes. So according to International Standards Organization, which is developing standards for responsible AI, these are the things that need to be taken into account. These are the principles. And then fairness, privacy, transparency, robustness, non-maleficence, inclusiveness, and accountability. But other organizations may have different principles in addition to them, or they may have the same principles written in a different lingo. Then international standard organizations come up with some good practices. Like design for humans means use a diverse set of users, use case scenarios, incorporating the feedback before and then throughout the project's development. So this says to make your AI system responsible, adopt these things. Use multiple metrics, probe the raw data, then understand the limitations of your model, then continuously test your model to responsible AI standards to ensure that it looks into the real world phenomena, user feedback is taken into account, consider both short term and long term solutions to the issues. So, International Standards Organization now tries to, through these good practices, tries to translate the vague principles like accountability, inclusiveness into actionable points. For example, say, probe the raw data for mistakes. And then this is important to assure that transparency is built in. ensuring that responsible AI principles of fairness, equity, and accuracy are already built in. Then understand the limitations of the system to mitigate bias, improve generalization to reliable performance in real world scenario. In the sense that don't think of the system as a black box which operates in a specific context or algorithms that are totally devoid of real world exposure. In the sense that test it in the real world context, real world scenario, and then make them as part of the responsible AI framework. Then comes the question of limitations we have talked about, contingency test we have talked about. So these are the good practices that ISO standard they recommend. Question here is the ISO standards are very general, but moving to specific sectors becomes little tricky because domain specific issues and priorities will be variable. As we said again and again, in some things like health and finance and then banking, the relationship between the user and then the institution is very different. So there is some sort of fiduciary relationship of trust, of trustworthiness is part of the accountability and responsibility. We rely on the doctors and then we rely on the banks, we rely on the financial institutions that they will maintain secrecy, that they will deal with us fairly, and more importantly, they will not divulge the information. And then the nature of application and then the system also becomes something that is very decisive. If the application is very complex and the system is also going to meet diverse needs of diverse users, how do we ensure that these parameters are really built in and then brought in into the system? And then responsibility, as we said, is not ethics, although there's a huge overlap. So how do we, should companies say that I have done with AI ethics, I am not bothered about responsible AI because to me both are the same? Or should companies say that I will try to use AI ethics to the maximum extent possible, and I think when it comes to responsible AI, I will not try to do anything because to me they are one and the same? Or can companies take a stand that I understand that both are different, both may be overlapping, both may look similar in some context, but they are not. So I will pay equal attention to both. I will pay equal attention to both, and then I will try to develop systems where both principles are incorporated in the letter and spirit, and then they adhere to the ethical principles as well as responsible AI principles. But the challenge here is that implementing both would need a lot of capacity. And if you are a small developer who is developing a small application for a small industry, engineering industry, or if you are developing something for a very small institution, how much of the effort, how much of the initiative, how much of the resources in terms of time and energy will go into making them ethically accountable and then responsible when the application itself is not that controversial? So this again needs a whole lot of thinking. As to should we say that every AI application should fulfill 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 norms of ethics, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 norms of responsible AI, or are we going to give the right and liberty to decide, contextualize? For example, hospitals can come together and then identify the priorities in responsible AI principles and then say we adhere them to as core principles which every AI application in the health sector will adhere to. And then these principles everyone would adhere to and to the maximum, but we again give some flexibility and leeway for the institutions and then the hospitals or in the specific context for the institutions to decide as to what extent they would go for, although they would try to adhere to them to the extent possible. Obviously, the next question here would be, how about metrics? How about comparison, evaluation, assessing them? And then who is going to develop them? Organizations like ISO can do, professional bodies can do, standard setting organizations at the national level can do, even other institutions like IEEE, government nominated bodies, government set up bodies can do them. But why responsible AI is getting more important is that in the last 5 years also, lot of private consultancy firms have sprung into action because they see a whole lot of new market emerging in responsible AI. So they have worked with companies, they have worked with different sectors, and then they come up with specific responsible AI guidelines, principles, good practices, and methodologies. And many of these consultancy firms and some of these consultancy firms are also developing AI systems, or either they develop the AI systems in part and then work with others in integrating them into larger systems, So the responsible AI has been promoted for the simple reason consultancy firms, big industry, and then the sensitive industry like banking and finance, and in Europe and where there is the EU Act has now come, but GDPR has been there even earlier, and then many national regulations also look into responsible AI as a guiding principle. So based upon various factors like this, responsible AI has become mainstream now. So we cannot simply say responsible AI has become mainstream. It has become something actionable, that is discernible, and something that could be easily put to, not exactly easily put to practice, but then that is also easily getting translated into various systems and then various subsystems as well. But then there are a whole lot of concerns. Quantification. Will the quantification really miss the qualitative aspect, or should we talk of qualitative, or should we talk of hybrid approach? Then for whole question of ethics washing and then ticking the boxes ethics visa, the same thing would happen to responsible AI. Develop a nice methodology, develop a format, develop a whole lot of boxes, decision trees, put them all together as a bound manual, responsible AI guidance manual, and then have some tick boxes to tick, tick, we have done it. We have done this on transparency. We have done this on accountability. We have done this on inclusiveness. Or is it going to be something that is AI washing and then ticking a lot of boxes without doing anything? But we don't have tools that can really assess and then certify as to what extent these responsible AI principles have been realized in practice, or how exactly these systems have worked in well. Then, as we saw, the major stakeholders here have been the big consultancy firms and then the AI developers and then the industry itself. And it is not the public, it is not the other stakeholders who have had a say in deciding what is responsible AI, or they were not the ones who were the driving force in it. So, where does the government come into this is a big question. Then, responsible AI can also be used in some sectors like law enforcement just to get more power, in the sense that when I say I am having responsible AI facial recognition technology, when I have a responsible AI predictive AI, it could mean you have something responsible. So we will give you more power. You become more credible in the sense that you are assured that as you claim it is going responsible AI, nobody is going to really challenge it in terms of practice. Then the relationship between our responsible AI and the regulation is complex. It is not fully understood. It is taking shape, but not in a very nebulous condition. And if the governments, as of today, their tendency is more towards less regulation, more innovation. So, particularly after Trump has taken over, the tendency has shifted towards less regulation, more innovation. And then the Paris AI Summit of February 2025 also showed us that many countries are moving towards from tighter regulation to softer regulation, and then even trying to rework on some of the stricter liabilities and then some of the harsher practices or penalties that would stifle innovation. So, in that case, will responsible AI become more a question of regulation by the industry, more a question of soft law than by hard law, or by very strict regulation through legislation and then by the guidance rules promulgated by the government or by any other organization? So these are some of the things which we need to really take into account when we talk of responsible AI. In the next session, we will look into responsible AI in law and justice as to what exactly we mean by responsible AI in law and justice broadly. And then the session after that, we will look into responsible AI in law and justice in the specific Indian context. Thank you.